And we're ready to go. Well, welcome everybody again. This is the Level Up Learner Skills in Collaboration, Communication, Critical Thinking, and Creativity to improve students' readiness for post-secondary graduation life. That's a mouthful. This is about digital citizenship skills. How about that? Is what we're looking at. And we're going to be exploring this, and there'll be, please feel free to use the chat at any time to ask questions or to share your perspective. We are going to, let me just double check that I have the ability to make breakout rooms. I do. Okay. There will be a point where I'll give you a chance to process what is, what we go, this content, and you'll be put into different groups for that. Right. So with that said, let's dive into this. So first, let's begin with if we can use these community agreements, which are, reflecting as a gift for learning, putting ideas and questions on the table, share your thoughts and expertise, as well as presume positive intent as we explore these ideas. What does it get you thinking about, as well as monitor itself and others. And when we think about the global professional skills, the 4 C's, it's always a valued piece to have a learning community agreement, especially to have your students craft them, because it's a way for them to not only own their community or culture, but they get to craft what that means. And by crafting it, then it opens up opportunities for reflection. And just I'm John McCarthy. I'm the one facilitating this particular piece. And like I said, in the handout, you will find that there is a link to all the resources that I'm going to be referencing that you can tap into to use with your students. So let's begin with this initial question that I want you to be thinking about, and that is, how do we prepare students for creating jobs that do not yet exist? And that's a very different way of looking at things, because I know we've all heard the phrase, how do you prepare students for jobs that do not exist? And instead of thinking of our students as job creators, when they graduate from your organization, your institutions, and they go on to whether college or career, how can they be in a position to open up these ideas? Because there's, every 5 years, it seems like we are having new industries open up. One example would be esports. If those of you are familiar with that, the idea of playing video games professionally and being paid for that. Tetris is an esport. I was just watching some competitions yesterday where there are people competing for prize money through Tetris. And so these are things that are career opportunities that open up other things for our students to do. And this becomes important when we think about, information like this. So this is from NACE, the National Association of Colleges Employers, and they survey every year their membership, asking them, what are the most important skill sets that they want for incoming college students and employees? So take a moment, look at this list. Look, this is the top end of the list, what was described most sought after. Think about what's there. Here's a closer look. Look at the skills that they're looking for. And think about where we think about critical thinking, like problem solving, communication, collaboration, as in working in teams. These are all things that colleges and employers are saying are their most prized. That they want to see that the incoming graduates from your schools being able to use and work within what they do. And if that is the case, then we have to ask ourselves, how are we preparing them for that? How are we embedding this type of skill development into our academics, into our curriculum? And fortunately, there's real added value for our crossover skills when students develop these skill sets. They actually can do better in your content classes, your grade levels, whether you teach at elementary, say from kindergarten all the way up into senior year in high school. And that's something we want to think about, is that's the focus of this session is, okay, well, if that's the case, how do we accomplish that? And we're going to get really into the weeds about what does that mean? What does that look like? So a way of looking at this in terms of collaboration, critical thinking, creativity is it's something we take for granted. So, and breathing is a great example. I want you to take a moment and reflect on this question for you. And that is, how would you describe, how would you teach someone to breathe? Might seem like a strange question to ask, but look at this list and pick one of these that is familiar to you and ask, and if you were to explain, what would that look like? You know, especially I think I was a cross country coach and track and field coach, and I think about sprinting and jogging that, or even running long distance versus short distances. And there is definitely a different way of breathing. Those of you who perhaps do yoga, when you think about warrior pose versus plank pose or pigeon, that those are very distinct ways. Breaststroke, freestyle, very distinct, different ways of breathing when we think about this. Here's another way of looking at it. If you play basketball or you're familiar with basketball in terms of the mechanics, and that's what we're talking about. What are the mechanics that help you do a certain type of skill effectively? And you can see these are just steps for having strong mechanics to do a free throw or to do a jump shot in basketball. And so when we think about that, we think of mechanics and think about content areas. Whether you teach English or social studies, science, mathematics, you do research, there are specific academic mechanics that we require of our students, that we teach them so that they can be effective in that. So then the question that I want to ask you to think about right now, and perhaps share some of your thoughts in the chat, is what are the mechanics for the 4 C's? What does good collaboration and communication skills look like? How do we know as a student that we're using good critical thinking or problem solving skills? And as educators, do we know how to observe, assess, and teach the mechanics of creativity? Okay, here's an easier way of looking at this. Is I want you to think about whether you are a classroom teacher or maybe you're an administrator or a leader who goes into classrooms. And we've all been in classrooms and we've all seen student teams. And likely we've all seen some student teams that were dysfunctional, that just did not work. So my question for you is, when students' teams are not working well together, who usually is the one who's got to either solve the problem or initiate solving the problem? Let's see if a couple of brave souls will post your answer in the chat. Who solves the problem when a student team becomes dysfunctional? Who usually is the one who solves it or leads the solving? All right, points for Jose, brave soul, putting that down. And that is the case. I ask this question everywhere that I do this work with schools around global professional skills. And this is the answer that 99% of the time comes up, that the teacher is the one who has to go and at least initiate getting students to how to solve the problem, whatever dysfunction may be. Well, here's the thing. If it's the teacher who's solving the problem, then that means the students have not learned how to effectively communicate and collaborate. I mean, think about that for a moment. Problems start small in a group. It might be that someone tends to be domineering, or someone's not really sharing much, or participating, or showing up late, and they kind of pass it off. And then it just builds and builds and builds until it blows up. And the thing is, as teachers, we see the blow up, or we see when things are really tense. but the students haven't learned how to identify those issues when they're small in order to address them before they get big. And now I've seen schools where they do that. There are several schools I can think of in Michigan where that's part of their process is teaching teaching students how to do these skills effectively. And that's what I'll be sharing with you is some concrete ways that we can truly teach the mechanics of these 4 C's so that students can recognize those mechanics and practice them correctly. Um, yeah, and that's a good point. Because I have to work this year to step back and have them find a solution. Absolutely, but here's the thing: that's a good first step, but that's not the only step. The other part is as we step back, which is really important because they got to learn if they make mistakes. That's fine. At the same time, we need to teach them the skills for how we want them to solve, do solution solving, depending on what the situation may be. And so, for example, here's just some ideas. When we think about mental frameworks that are frequently available that we are familiar with, and oftentimes, depending upon your subject area, what you teach, that you might be using some of these ideas because these, like the writing process. I was an English teacher and social studies teacher. Where when they're writing papers and they're structuring their ideas and they're identifying, especially research steps are also important. There are structures that we can teach students to concretely understand what they're looking for. And we can use those mental models that we already have as a framework for students to think about that. Because for example, the writing process is not a linear thing. We move up and down. We might do some brainstorming, ideating of ideas, and then we might start doing a draft and realize that we start doing a draft that we need more research. We go back to ideation if we're doing research. It flows around, and as students understand that structure, how we make what's invisible visible to them, it can make a big difference. And then, there's other types of strategies that we can use. And perhaps many of these you may be familiar with. And the key is not to just do the strategy. The intent of the strategies is to offer opportunities for students to reflect or do goal setting before using the strategy. That, I think of, for example, with Socratic seminar and fishbowl, which are common examples of practice that students do, but don't always know why they're doing it or don't have the opportunity to reflect afterwards on how well it worked and what parts did not work. I think of a school that I worked with where it was a class where the teacher did a group activity. Students worked in teams, and before they left, for the end of the period, she said to the students, okay, 2 things I want you to do. First, I want you to reflect on what did you do well when it came to communication and collaboration. And she had a whole list of what those skills look like. And then she said, now I want you to reflect on what could your team do better? Think about that question. How often do we ask that? And how do we structure those conversations for that? So what I'm going to do right now is I need to double check how many people we have in this room because I want to put you into a quick breakout to just digest what I have been sharing here with you. And I am looking. Oh, it's 24. Okay, so I'm going to put you in I'm going to put you in 7 groups. It's going to automatically assign you to a group. And in that group, you're going to quickly introduce yourself to say who you are. And then what I want you to do is just reflect on this idea of how do we make the 4 C's visible? What are the mechanics that will help our students understand what those skills look like so they can be very effective? You're going to have 2 minutes, 3 minutes to talk about it, starting as I open the rooms now. Right. So just as a reminder for your help, because we're going to go through a couple of different strategies very quickly. And so this link I just dropped in, again, the first link is to the handout. The second link is to the PDF version of this slide deck, so that if you think, oh, wait, I want to take some time and look at this particular resource, you can do that and not feel like you're you're falling behind it when you want to look at those pieces. All right, so if you think about what's going on. Oh, no worries, Michelle here. Let me drop the link in for you again, but you'll have that. So let's think about communication and collaboration. And one of the things we want to do is we want to think about, what does it look like? What are those concrete skills? This is just some examples. By the way, this list that you see, this is an actual artifact of what a school adopted for their students in order to describe what collaboration looks like. What does communication look like? So that, and the key for this is so that students, when they're interacting with each other, they can have concrete conversations around, around the work and what they're trying to do. So if we say that, collaboration is listens to others, fully present to others' ideas and questions. If someone says, well, you're not collaborating with me, and I think, well, wait, I was listening. And then the response will be, well, you thought you were listening, but you're on your phone half the time. So how do I know you're listening? You're looking at your screen half the time. And now it's a very concrete conversation that can address what those pieces are. And so this is just, we call coaching charts that teachers will put up for students to use as a guide. Now this is one, as you look closer, this is one for both high school and middle school. And later on, I will show you charts that are used all the way down to the kindergarten level in terms of doing this type of work. And again, please feel free to post your questions or observations in the chat. And so we manage communication, it's just it's important with those coaching charts that we are doing some type of practice and reflection on a weekly basis. And it's easy to embed this if we're already putting students into groups. If we're having interaction that's student-led conversations to provide these opportunities and use these resources. There are things like talk moves, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, came through science, but these are specific categories of talking stems for how to have professional conversations, both agreement to show agreement and to show disagreement. And I've seen this used in grades 5 and 6, where students have these on laminated cards on their desk where they can refer to as they're practicing conversations around this work. And they do a very good job with this. And when you go to this link, goes to an article that has this chart. And then also in the article, there's a link to a version for ELL, which could also be used for elementary. So there's just so much we can do with that. When you think about different protocols and activities, like I'm sure many of us are familiar with elbow partners and talking sticks, different things like that. And these are things that we can have students do and then have them reflect on their practice. And norms, as we said, norms is a great way for students to own the process of describing what they feel is a healthy culture for them. Because in the absence of having all the students come to that decision, they all operate independently about what their belief statement is, and not everyone has it at the same way. Yeah, clock partners. And you know what? This, Brooke, a side thing about clock partners, there's some teachers who actually, instead of clocks, they use the contact list of a cell phone as their image for setting up partners. And it serves the same purpose. And so when we look at this is one example of community, the steps for that process of having students do community agreement, and then they review them every week. And that review could be literally 60 seconds. I know some of you are going to say, well, it takes at least about two 20 to 30-minute sessions to create community agreements. That's taking most of some people's class time, and I don't have time for that. Yet the reality is, short term, it's a lot of time, but long term, when students own the process of how to professionally interact and support each other, you save so much time. It really can reduce the behavior management issues because the students now own the process and they're having the conversations with their peer group. And you can use things like these type of ways of teaching students how to manage. Mediation protocols, one of my favorite ones. It came from the world of project-based learning. And I've seen it in several schools in Michigan. By the way, I'm based in Canton, Michigan. So I've been in Michigan for, raised my kids here in Michigan. And so the mediation protocol is a great resource for literally teaching students a 4-step process where the first 2 steps, let me put it this way, the teacher does not get involved until step 3. So literally when students have challenges with team issues and they go complain to the teacher, the first response the teacher says is, have you started the process and what step are you on? Because if they haven't done steps 1 and 2, then the teacher's not formally involved in the conversations. And it's empowering. My kids I've experienced as a parent to see how my kids have gone through this type of process, and I've talked to kids who've gone through it. It's powerful. The students really own that process. And we want to keep in mind that one of the things that can really help when we're teaching collaboration and communication, that we don't attach group grades, because group grades can really create a lot of distress and dysfunction, where you have some students who are doing all the work because other students don't do any of the work, even though they know they're going to get the same grade. So there's no incentive for them to do that. But what's even worse for that is that when we have those group grades where we don't know who's doing the work, is that as a teacher, we're getting assessment data that for some of our kids is foggy and not on point. And so we have this assumption that some kids are doing really well, when in reality, they didn't do any of the work or participate in the work. So that's something to consider in the process. If you're interested in more information about that, I've written several articles for Edutopia about assessment fog. I'd be happy to share that. And so one of the things, and you'll see with this particular link, is that there are resources that you can, that I've worked with schools to design that are freely available for you to use. And these resources are ones that give you strategies to share with teachers, and this was designed by teachers, both from the curriculum side, like what are curriculum strategies that really work to support this? What are strategies that use tech as a focus? And what are just good strategies to focus on the mechanics? And just to help you, I'm gonna drop the link right in here so you can check this, because this takes you to a document that's not just about collaboration and communication, but as you see, it's also about creativity and critical thinking. So looking at critical thinking, we have, again, same process. You can look at, this is a chart. This is one that's actually used in a classroom with students. And what I want to show here is, again, we have some strategies like question formulation technique, which is a way to have students understand the value and purpose of closed-ended and open-ended questions, where to use them and how to use it. And when you have kids of your own, I'm sure you had this experience I have had, where one of my kids would ask me something, and in my head, I'm thinking that's the wrong question. So if we say that to them, they get really frustrated if they don't understand the difference between the value of an open-ended and a closed-ended question. But if we've trained them on what is the value and purpose of an open-ended and closed-ended question, among other types of questions like probing questions, and clarifying questions, then we could say that's the wrong question to ask. And then they start thinking their mental model, okay, I asked this type of question, I asked a closed-ended question, maybe I need to ask an open-ended question, or maybe maybe it needs to be a probing or clarifying question. And so they develop these mental models to enable them to be even more effective in their skills. And so this is just, you'll see the chart gives you different the steps for how to do of the question formulation technique. And then, think about thinking models again. Go back to your thinking models. Which one are you using with your students? Which one are you explicitly teaching them so that they can unpack and follow it? I watched in Michigan, a high school, I watched a math teacher who had students working in teams, and whenever they got stuck, they had to come to him, and they couldn't ask what the answer was or a hint. They could say, here's the thing, we're stuck, we don't know what to do. And all his responses were questions. and they're open-ended questions. They had to go back and take it to the group and use that to try to unpack what they need to do next. And so we can build these structures gradually over time and have our students really develop these skill sets. As for SAMR model, it's just one model. I know there's other models, but I use this as an example only to say that, in SAMR's own interviews has said this was never intended to be a leveling piece where substitution is the lowest level and redefinition is the highest level, but rather that you can do critical thinking at any of those levels of these stages of this approach. And I mean, yeah, substitution, it might be a low use of technology, but you can still have high order thinking for exercises happening in a substitution format. So that's something we want to be mindful of as we think about exercises and problems, like how we intentionally break this down and communicate this to our students. And then you have this long list of different ways that you can do this work. Now I'm showing this because I'm going to give you in breakout room just a moment to kind of digest what I'm sharing with you, because the nature of this is a chart, by the way, that shows you what one school district did where they crafted their coaching charts for all grade level bands, K3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, and they had 5 C's. They had communication, collaboration, critical thinking, creativity, and citizenship. That's what they were focused on. And you have access to this. So you can take this, you can use it, you can adapt it. All these resources are linked into the handout that I'm sharing with you. So let me stop there. I'm gonna send you back into your groups. And I'm just gonna remind you, if you haven't already downloaded it, that this second link that I'm dropping in here is the PDF for what I'm sharing with you. And if you take a look at that, you can use that as a reference, refer back to, and say, okay, when I think about the mechanics for teaching, here's some skills and strategies that resonate to me, and here's why. Or I want to talk about the grading piece. And again, I'm gonna give you 3 minutes to explore and discuss this in your breakout rooms. Right, so here we go. Well, welcome back, everybody. So I want to make sure I leave some time for any questions you might have of me. And so the last piece is creativity. And this is to kind of show, again, how we create these charts to support the work. And you have access to all the different charts. There's different ways this is broken down to support student thinking. Sometimes there's a nuanced difference between creativity and innovation. I write regularly for Edutopia. This is one article that has a resource that talks about the ways, different strategies and approaches for students to use to think about how to be creative or how to use that process to find what works for them. And there's different opportunities from performance assessments and performance tasks. You do an inquiry learning, and if you embed reflection, wait time and think time, like giving students anywhere from 15 seconds to 30 seconds of silent reflection. Yeah, you heard me say that, 15 to 30 seconds. There's a national survey study, there's been a couple over the decades, on how long do teachers generally pause before speaking again. What do you think is that answer? How long do you think they do? Post your ideas in the chat. I see 5, I can show 5 fingers, 2 fingers. Yeah, well, the average, and I've actually, I've sat in on classrooms to kind of see for myself, it's been pretty consistent. It's been 0.9 seconds. So 0.9 seconds doesn't give a lot of students time to think. The studies did say that if we pause for at least 3 seconds, there was significant increase in participation. I find 5 to 15 seconds or 5 to 30 seconds, depending upon the complexity of the answer we're looking for, not the question, can be really helpful. And so silence is a gift for reflection. So these are ways to help students work on creativity, to be creative, to be innovative in the work that they do. And there's lots of different things that we can do around that to support the creative process. And again, this is a list. You'll be able to look at the slides, and as well as all the resources that I'm sharing with you. But let me pause here and just say, what questions do you have for me? And feel free to use the chat, or if you use the mic, that's fine. Just if one person starts talking to the mic, then everyone else is kind of wait.
John Scott Koenig here, MDE. And I think you're touching into a really great space that may conquer this, hopefully, question that don't anger everyone. But there's conversation out there that says that modern day schools are more about compliancy versus creativity. And maybe you can talk about your subject area and how this helps break compliancy, if you will, or meaning teachers really like to have that power, if you will, but this is a different way of teaching, isn't it? And a different way of educating and breaking open. But maybe you can talk more about that.
Yeah, sure. One of the best field trips for professional learning I always recommend to all educators is go visit a kindergarten class if you haven't done so in a while, and take a look and see what's going on. When you think about what do you see? When you see some places it looks like chaos because there's kids all over the place, different parts of the room, and yet it's organized. I mean, the teacher knows where all the students are and why they're there. They're doing choice activities. The teacher might be a station. The students are making decisions for themselves, and they're moving around the room doing different things. Now, fast forward and go to a second, third, or fourth grade class. It kind of depends on the school and the class. And the question is, what do you see? You see desks. They may not necessarily be in rows nowadays, but you see a lot of kids sitting in desks who are being trained unintentionally to, basically to respond to what the teacher is creating. So before I do anything, what does the teacher want? And by the time we get to middle school and high school, again, this is no shade on teachers. This is just the nature. If we can look at this honestly and say, this is what we're seeing, is that we can see there are groups of kids who are very compliant and just waiting to, when the teacher's thinking, okay, I want you to take the lead on this and do this piece, and the students won't do it. And what I always say to teachers at all levels is that if we recognize that that's what the system generally does, then we need, in order to change what students are doing, we have to retrain them into having those opportunities, because it's a different mindset. Fortunately, you can incorporate that into existing practice. I used to say, like a lot of people say, oh, you have to give up control, but you don't. You can still control the design, the sandbox, and then give students that freedom and flexibility inside those confines, or you can collaborate with students. Because if students have more agency, where they start to see the classroom culture, the learning culture as something that they contribute to, then there's more buy-in. Then it's not, we're just passing by and visiting. And that's why with these coaching charts it's a great place to start, because the teacher designs those coaching charts, identify what these look like. At the same time, when you do norms, the students design the norms with facilitation by the teacher. And once you have that structure in place, you can then begin to do more, where you give students that agency to make those decisions. But it does, just please keep in mind that when you start to do this and students push back and they're not participating, it's not because they don't believe in it. It's because you have to recognize that if they've been trained for 3, 4, 8 years to be the way they are unintentionally, it's going to take time to untrain them and move them forward. Hopefully, I mean, that's not the full answer, Scott, but hopefully that's a way to start.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thanks.
Yeah. What other questions do you guys have? We've got about 2 minutes left. It's definitely outside their comfort zone. But here's the interesting about that. This is something, I mean, think about if you have kids or you have nephews or nieces, when you see them outside of school doing the things they love to do, their behaviors are not always the same as in school. You know, I mean, if they're passionate about sports, gaming, or some type of hobby, and they can talk about it, they take the lead, they do research, they might watch videos, they might talk to other people to get the answers they need. They're very active. And for some reason, as they come into school, they walk through the door, they shift. because they think that the game, I call the game called school, is different from their lives outside of school. And it doesn't have to be that way. It's because it's not intended to be that way. So it's not that necessarily it's out their comfort zone. It's that they perceive an expectation in school that is different from their expectations outside of school. And if we recognize what those are, we can help navigate them to a different space. Yeah, and that's the last thing I'll close with, because we're running out of time, is what Scott's talking about. Those norms, those community environments are so impactful when you allow the students to create them, not rules. I'm talking about the professional behaviors that we're going to use to support each other in our learning. Kids know what they are because they've been in groups, organizations that were functional and healthy. So they know what it looks like, and they've been in situations where it's not been. So rather than us create, let them create it. And then when a student tests that and they're not following the norms, you don't have to have a conversation about what they're doing wrong, a behavioral conversation. You can have a coaching conversation, because, hey, wait, didn't you sign and agree to these norms that you guys created? Okay, right. So it's not me. I didn't come up with this. Your peers came up with it. You came up with it. So let's work on it. Sorry, we're out of time here. If you have, on my thing, I have my contact information. Please feel free, if you have other questions for me, just send them my way, and I'll be happy to answer that. But thank you for your time. Appreciate it.